read The Killing Rage, Ending Racism by Bell Hooks, and this is a compilation of essays that she wrote over the course of 20 years. It was published in 1995, and it's her 11th book out of 30, or over 30 books. I'm not sure exactly what number she is at now. And the overall theme, I'm actually going to take you right to the last essay, because the overall theme, I think, is explained there, basically that racism can be fixed, or white supremacy, we can dissolve white supremacy, but then we need to go out at it from another angle. So she talks about, the last essay is called Beloved Community, that idea that I know is not unique to Martin Luther King Jr., but we often associate that idea with him. And she says that that from its inception it was a flawed vision. The flaw, however, was not the imagining of a beloved community. It was the insistence that such a community could exist only if we erased and forgot racial difference. So basically, the narrative throughout this book is an attention to racial difference, and that is how white supremacy will be dismantled. So she got the title Killing Rage. It kind of stemmed, she gives this story, she tells a story of being on an airplane and having a really racially charged, I would just say racist interaction, and this feeling of wanting to kill this white guy next to her, and she really talks about like just wanting to murder him. And then she goes in and talks throughout the book about like black rage and what does that mean, and that it's often associated with lower socioeconomic status, but that it's really justified. So she says, many African Americans feel uncontrollable rage when we encounter white supremacist aggression. That rage is not pathological. It is an appropriate response to injustice. However, if not processed constructively, it can lead to pathological behavior, but so can any rage, irrespective of the cause that serves as the catalyst. And then just a couple of pages later, she talks about that it's useful for white supremacist capitalist patriarchy to make all black rage appear pathological rather than identify the structure wherein that rage surfaces. So there's this narrative about black rage and that it's justified and it's real, and it often gets sort of like put in this category of mental illness, and how do we change that narrative? So that's one of the things that she talks about, and that's where the title came from. There were a lot of themes in this book, and I was thinking a lot when I was reading it that it was written over the course of 20 years, and what does that mean? So two main themes that really stuck out to me are her use of history and the relevance of history, and also the relevance of historical trauma, and she really ties those two ideas together. And then the other big theme is feminism, and really specifically like what was referred to in the late 90s as revolutionary feminism. So in terms of history, she, as I just said, she makes a case for black people healing psychological wounds, and she says that that's so that black people don't continue to internalize racism. And I should have said that Bell Hooks identifies as an African-American woman, in case you weren't aware of that. And she also argues for a discourse around colonization rather than racism being an individualized thing. So, she talks about this interaction on the airplane as an individual interaction. However, it stems from history and historical trauma and from a long history of colonization, and that we can't separate those two ideas. And then on the other hand, she talks a lot about feminism and her role as a black woman in the feminist movement. So she starts the book by talking about that race is usually held as this space in black culture for men, and that men can talk about race, and then when women talk about race, it has to be intersectional. But then in the same breath, she also talks about that she thinks that we do need to talk about it from an intersectional perspective. So she really specifically says that we can't separate patriarchy from racism, and she doesn't subscribe to the idea that we'll deal with racism first and then we'll deal with sexism. Like, she really talks about that those things need to happen at the same time. I thought there was a pretty powerful piece in here. So she says the crisis in black life has been created in part because of the continued support of patriarchy and the misguided paradigms for social change that emerge from a patriarchal mindset. Unless black folks, male and female, along with our allies in struggle, can rise to the challenge, dare to critique patriarchy, as well as courageously offer redemptive, liberatory models for social change, We will remain in an impasse, stuck, unable to move forward. And she says that like transformational politics, that's the way that we're going to counter that sense of despair and hopelessness in Black life. And she talks about feminism and sort of like first wave, like white people feminism and some of the critiques that she has of that. And one of her main critiques is this idea of like shared victimhood, and she really rejects that idea, and and she advocates for a discourse of self-determination versus like solidarity in victimhood. And she talks about that generally in Black culture, Black feminist female voices are dismissed, and that challenging sexism is necessary to remedy the hopelessness in Black life, while keeping attention to the idea of revolutionary feminism, which is more intersectional, at that time was more intersectional, versus like the feminism primary agenda that was really focused around privileged white women. Two other issues, I mean, there are so many themes in this book, but two other themes that I thought were sort of important were she weaves in this narrative around issues that are important for both white people and Black people to think about, but from different perspectives. So one of those issues she talks about is classism, and that Black culture ignores classism in the same way that white culture does, and that in order to dismantle racism and white supremacy, Black culture is going to need to start paying attention to classism. And she sort of weaves that in with this idea of embracing Blackness, and that, and sort of like we hear the narrative like Black is beautiful and things like that, and that's really important. And talks about the different experiences of light-skinned Black people versus dark-skinned Black people and the classism inherent in that, and that is a factor of the white supremacy that we all internalize regardless. So like, the same way that I am taught to, have internalized that because I'm a white person, I'm better than someone else, like that people of color have the same messages given to them. And I also watched a C-SPAN interview with her where she talks specifically about how this book and how she wrote this book for everyone, that it wasn't necessarily geared towards a specific audience, which I thought was interesting. And sort of when I was thinking about strengths and weaknesses of this book, I think I told you a lot of the strengths that I think are important. That I really thought that the attention to history and historical trauma was really important. I also appreciated her ability to connect her own personal experiences with greater societal issues and not sort of speaking for all Black people, but relating her own experiences. I thought that was like a delicate balance that she held. And the other thing that, Bell Hooks is known for being a little controversial and like pushing the mold and being able to be critical of other Black activists, and I appreciate that about her. I think that there's, an importance in solidarity, but I also appreciate her willingness to push other people, especially Black men. And also along that note, she really connects her ideas well to ideas of other authors and thinkers. This isn't just her idea, she really includes other people and other narratives in this book. The last strength I would say is that I think that it is pretty accessible. It's it's beautifully written, and she's really an incredible thinker, but it's fairly probably easier to read than some of the other books that we've read in this class. But on the flip side of that, something that she's critiqued for, and not only in this book, is that her writing is like unscholarly. So she doesn't cite anything. She does have this like kind of, what does she call it? A bibliography section, a selected bibliography section in the back, but there aren't direct citations. So I think reading it in an academic context, that really stuck out to me. But I did look this up, and I saw an interview with her where she was talking about that was really intentional, and that she doesn't want to like scare people off by having this like really academic sort of heavy writing. But I guess that could be considered a weakness. It feels kind of inappropriate for me to critique someone like Bell Hooks with, she has more knowledge and experience than I will ever have. But something that I was thinking about when I was reading this is the fact that it was published in '95, and it's really written from a very like gender normative perspective. So she really talks about like men and women, and I was just thinking about like, I wonder if she was rewriting this now or like publishing, would she take a different, would she talk about gender in a more fluid way, or would she think about that aspect? But I realized that that wasn't the point of this book, so I don't know if that's a strong critique, but it was just something that I was thinking about. But the main thing that I thought about a lot is, so when she has, when the essays start, they just look like this. They just have the title and they don't have a date. And since it was written over the course of 20 years, I really wanted to know like when each one was written. So I think that's like the main thing that was missing for me from this book. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you, presenter. Let's have some questions.
Did you have a favorite essay?
I think the one about